Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Passive House Canada's Building Conversation webinar for this week. Glad you're able to join us. My name is Deborah Knopf, and I'm the HR manager for the Passive House Canada. I'm going to be your moderator for this week. I just want to draw your attention over to the right side of the screen for those of you that may not have attended a webinar before. Just a few little tools to be aware of. If you look over into the handout section, you're going to see some links to information that you're going to hear about today. So we will remind you at the end of the session as well about this, but some great information to keep at hand. There's also the questions section. So the way the session's going to run today is we're going to have the webinar for about 35-40 minutes, and then you're welcome to write in your questions in that section at any time. I'm going to hang on to those questions and we'll address them at the end of the session. So feel free to write them in. Only I and the presenters can see the questions. So feel free to write anything in there that you need to, and anything else you might need to address as well during the webinar. If you have any concerns or you can't hear the webinar, please let me know as well too, and we can get that fixed up. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Chris Ballard, our CEO. Chris?
Well, thanks, Deb, for that introduction, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I hope wherever you are in Canada, you've got a beautiful August day to enjoy. And we have a really great show today. I've been really looking forward to having Marcel Studer on with me. Marcel's one of the first people I met when I joined Passive House Canada, so looking forward to exploring his career. And getting some really good feedback about his advice and what we do. So without further ado, let's get the show underway. Start a little bit. People always want to know about me because I'm fairly new to Passive House Canada. I think I'm in about my 8th month now. I've had a varied career. Minister. I've been a provincial politician, municipal politician. I've worked in consumer advocacy, I've worked as a journalist, and all of that experience led me to understand one important thing, that Passive House standards for new and retrofit buildings answer many of our environmental and building challenges, including health, resilience, comfort, and low energy requirements. So I'm sure you're on board today to learn a little bit more of all of those things. And if you do know something about Passive House building standards, you know how important those things are. So again, if you don't know a lot about our organization, because we are newer to, even though we are a national group, we are newer to some parts of Canada. Passive House Canada is a membership-based not-for-profit. We're an advocacy organization. We are all about education and capacity building. We hold a lot of events, both national and local. We provide members with membership with the technical services. We have staff in at least 6 cities and growing, and we have instructors from across Canada. And today's guest, and I'll invite him to turn his camera on in a few minutes. Today's guest, as I said, is Marcel Studer. Marcel is principal of Econ Group out of Vancouver, a construction firm that has a focus on modern, high-quality architecture designed to the international Passive House standard. Marcel holds a master's degree in architecture, and he's originally from Switzerland, but he's lived and worked in Canada for the past 15 years. He is a Passive House a manager, consultant, designer, and I will say that he is highly regarded within the Passive House community here in Canada. He is an instructor for some of our courses, and he's also a member of our education committee, and we certainly look to Marcel because of his deep knowledge of Passive House building principles. We look to him for his expertise, especially around trades training. And we're going to talk about that a little bit with him in a minute. But first, a bit of an advertisement, a bit more background. Oftentimes, people in North America hear about Passive House and they see it as some foreign European concept. But I'm here to tell you that it has its roots, or some of its roots anyway, some of its DNA is Canadian. And the picture you see right here is the Saskatchewan Conservation House. And this was a place that was built back in 1977 by Dr. Orr and co-workers. It was funded by the Saskatchewan government. It was in response to the first OPEC oil embargo of the mid-70s, when governments were worried that that us Canadians living in a fairly cold climate would have difficulty getting through the winter if the oil pipeline from the Middle East and OPEC nations was turned off. So money was put into research. One of the projects that came out of it was the Saskatchewan Conservation House, and it's been acknowledged by the Passive House Institute as being one of the influencers of modern Passive House standards. So while Passive House Institute may be based in Europe and its standards adopted earlier in Europe, it has its roots right here in Canada, and for that, I always say we should be very, very proud. So moving along, for those again who are learning about Passive House principles, there are 5 simple principles of Passive House design. The principles may be simple. Implementing them, as Marcel will talk about, can be a little more complex. But what are those principles? The first is that the building is super well insulated, R40 in the walls, the foundation is well insulated. Second is that there is airtight construction, that there's minimal air leakage. So the warm air stays in, or in the summertime, the cool air stays in. That the structure is thermal bridge free. So there's no easy way for the heat or the cold to penetrate the walls of your building. And that you use high quality windows with solar orientation. High quality windows make all the difference, and how you orientate the building is critical. You want to let the winter sun in to warm the building, yet you want to make sure that the summer sun isn't getting into the building through the windows and overheating the structure. And the final principle is ventilation system with heat recovery. The HRVs, and I'll ask, we can talk more with Marcel about this. HRVs are more and more important these days as we talk about the health benefits of fresh, clean air in our living spaces, our working spaces, schools, hospitals, etc. So Passive House really has helped to lead the way with the development of very sophisticated ventilation systems. So without further ado, Marcel, why don't you and I find the right buttons, and we'll click on our cameras. There we are. Good morning.
Good morning, Chris.
And thanks again, Marcel, for joining us. So I pulled a few slides off of presentations you've given, and I figured we can use them as talking points. But I just wanted to start off with a bit of a general background. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself, an architect trained in Switzerland. How did you end up in Canada? Why did you stay in Canada? What are you doing now? And the big question is, why Passive House building standards?
Okay, yeah, so pretty much right after I graduated in Switzerland, which was early 2000s, January 2000, there wasn't a lot of jobs for architects in Switzerland. It also happened that my girlfriend at the time, now wife, she was looking at studying and getting her degree in naturopathic medicine, and she picked a school in Toronto for doing that. And so we ended up, I was actually in Toronto for the first 3 years before I moved west. Mm-hmm. And I kind of fell in love with the country, to be honest, because, you know, much different in size from Switzerland, as pretty, I would say, if not some, I really like that rugged nature that Canada has to offer that Switzerland doesn't have that much anymore. But what really impressed me was just the diversity that Canada has. And in Switzerland, a bit more of an older history, where there's, you know, lots of immigration, but definitely lots of people who have been there for centuries, right? So it's a bit of a different scenario, a bit more racism in that way. And so I really like that approach that Canada has, where there's so many different diverse cultures living in a country and working together and, you know, making the best of their lives and their country. So
Great.
that's kind of the moral reason why I stayed. But also I got to know my current business partner now, who is from North Vancouver, where I'm currently now, and we started a company in Toronto already. Did some renovations, did some landscaping in the summertime, and renovation in the winter. And going through architecture school, I'm maybe not the typical academic. I was kind of missing the connection between design, architecture, and the actual building. So I was always a bit more of a hands-on guy. Growing up in a rural area in Switzerland, working on my grandparents' farm, dairy farm. So I was always a bit tending more to that. So I really enjoyed, especially after 5-6 years of being at university and just doing drafting and theoretical architecture, to do some hands-on stuff and actually building things with my hands. So that's how I got into more of the construction side of things. And then when we moved to BC, that was in 2003, we started getting into building houses, building homes, and always interested in pushing the envelope a bit in regards of energy performance. At the time, there wasn't much there. I remember that the biggest thing that was happening at the time was that it was mandatory to put on a rain screen in BC, in coastal BC, because there was problems with leaky envelopes.
Right.
And then at that point, it was the energy requirement was still a 2x4 insulated. That was the code, right? And then next few years it changed. LEED was kind of coming onto the picture. It was more for commercial buildings. So we did one project, a fourplex, where we used the LEED standard. And then we also did Build Green, which was the kind of what came out of R2000, the Canadian Home Builders Association standard. Kind of the standards were maybe lacking a bit more of the depth that comes with the energy performance of buildings. They were more checklist based, and in my opinion, they weren't going far enough. And then in 2008, I got introduced to the Passive House standard. There was actually a fellow from Austria who came over, Dr. Guido Wimmers, who is still in BC now. He's at the Northern UBC campus in Prince George. And I met him personally, and we talked about, building and building standards, and he started to introduce me to the Passive House standard. And we actually built a first project to the standards, not really to a level that it would have been certifiable. We tried out a lot of the principles. At that point, it was really hard to get a decent HRV, to get the materials to do air tightness, even to get, the outboard mineral wool insulation that we now so much love here, to get high performance walls was a special order that took weeks to get in. Now we can buy it at Home Depot. So it was a bit harder. The windows came out of Europe because there was nothing comparable. But then quickly I saw that this was, this standard was grabbing a foothold, especially in Vancouver area, through the city of Vancouver, through the right people in the right places. The big trigger was also the Olympics in 2010, where the first Passive House was transplanted from Austria to Whistler. Really, all the materials, everything was brought in from Austria. And they used that Austria House to promote the Austrian businesses on TV when they were interviewing the Austrian athletes after their events. So kind of a weird thing. It's like this UFO from Austria landed, this Passive House UFO, and but it planted the first seed. And the municipality of Whistler was so excited, it actually got donated to them after. It's still there. If you're ever in Whistler, I encourage you to go. It's right on Lost Lake. You rent mountain bikes there in the summer, you rent cross-country skis in the winter, and it's a public building that everyone can see. So from then on, it really started to kind of, grab foothold, not just in Whistler, in Vancouver as well. The mayor, very, with the initiative Greenest City by 2020, that had a lot to do with also reducing carbon emissions in buildings. So a Passive House standard really slotted in nicely there. And yeah, from there on, it kind of, it came across Canada. There's lots of examples now in Ontario, in Eastern Canada, in Quebec, in the prairies. So you probably know a bit more of the modern history of Passive House Canada, but those were the early days.
But I will say that really for less than 10 years, a building standard has had quite an impact on the national building codes and many municipal building codes as well. And that's, 10 years may seem like a lifetime, but in terms of government action, that's lightning speed, quite frankly. So, thank you to all the Passive House proponents out there and true believers who have been pushing government, pushing builders to adopt Passive House standards. So let me just look at, we have this one slide that I think says an awful lot. It's not rocket science, it's building science. And you introduced me to that phrase, I think a long time ago, and I continue to steal and borrow it. What do you mean by that?
The standard is building science based, so that's where it's going. And everything new always, finds some resistance in people because they think, oh, this is too complicated. We can't do this. It's new. Yeah. And so this is a quick way for people to realize actually it's not. And just what you explained before, those 5 key principles, that's pretty much what's the core of the standard. And they're all based on building science. So building science meaning the way that heat flows, the different ways, the modes that heat flows through our assemblies of our buildings. So we have conduction on the right. You see that little graph there: conduction, convection, and radiation. And so once we understand those principles, and everyone who's involved in the project should really understand that. And it's just basic physics. Really, there's always, where there's more energy, it's going to move to a place where there's less energy. There's always that equilibrium that nature wants to do, right? So that's a very simple principle to grasp. And really, you don't need to know any formulas or anything like that, because that's all taken care of with the PHPP, which is the energy model that we use for Passive House. But just to understand kind of, how physics, how nature works in the basic principles helps a lot to then understand what we do to our buildings to make them more airtight and more insulated, why we're doing it.
Right. Now, you've been instrumental working with Passive House Canada to help us develop, and you've been one of the key people who's been delivering our courses as we go along. I'm just having a quick bit of technical issues moving my slides ahead, so bear with me. Maybe that's got it. Let's see if that'll do it. That's done it. And I sat in on one of your classes at Humber College a few months ago, but talk to me, talk to us a little bit about the tradesperson courses. We've offered them since 2016. Maybe you can tell me a little bit from your perspective about why it's so important that tradespeople working in the Passive House environment should have some training.
Yeah, so the trades course originated, like all the other courses, from from PHI, Passive House Institute in Germany, and so they put a curriculum together. But they realized early on that you can only get tradespeople so long into a classroom and show them PowerPoint slides and talk about building science. In the end, it's really those are the people that are building the buildings, and they need to practice doing those maybe new technologies, materials, methods of construction. And so the course always has a component of hands-on to it, and that's key, in my opinion, and not necessarily just for construction crews, but also we had a lot of architects and engineers going through these courses too, because if they know how to do it physically with their hands, they're probably going to draw it a little bit different than they would if they don't know how to do it. So and plus it's fun for them. Like they're missing that. Like if they go through their career as engineers and architects, they've been on the academic route, they never really got to swing a hammer, got to do any taping of airtight membranes, and a lot of them like that because now they can relate a bit more. So similar to what I mentioned in my story, right? When I came out of architecture school, I kind of missed that whole component of hands-on. So that's what we're trying to do with the trades course. I know it's geared more to trades. A lot of them, they have the skills already to, work with tools and not hurt themselves, for example. And so it started in 2016 locally here in Vancouver. We kind of took over the program from the Passive House Academy, which is out of Ireland. So it's a company that specializes in passive house education. At the time, they were reaching out to North America. The course was offered in New York before it came to Vancouver. And then we kind of found a place at BCIT, which is the local trades college. A nice, we call it the high performance building lab, where we started with very rudimentary mock-ups, and now there's lots of different, there's actual mini houses in there we can do airtightness testing on. There's different mock-ups of walls with windows in them. There's material samples, etc. So over the years, it's come to quite a resource. And also what they do is they actually rent it out for private companies, so you could do in-house training for a larger construction firm. Right. Obviously, with COVID, that all changed a bit. Unfortunately, they had to like put that on hold for a bit now, but hopefully that will get back to normal again. So the key is really that everyone involved in a construction project doesn't necessarily just have to be passive house. Any high performance construction projects understands the basic principles and then knows some of the tips and tricks, how to, especially around air tightness, how to get those great numbers of air tightness happening. So that's what we do in the hands. And of course, we can't teach them everything. I mean, we have typically in our course, we have like, maybe a day of hands-on training out of 4 days. So there's not, you can't teach them how to build a house from ground up, but you can show them some of the critical details.
So as you mentioned, because of COVID-19, Passive House Canada's tradespersons course moved from in person, 2 days in a classroom, 1 day actually in a hands-on environment, and we have moved our in-class courses online, and we deliver those over a couple of days. Can you tell me about Passive House Canada's trades course right now and what it looks like?
Yeah, so it's 3 4-hour segments, online format, just on the same platform that we're using now. The first one actually is on right now, so it's from 9 till 1 PST or PDT, which would make it 12 till 4, I guess, your time, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So the beauty again with this, I mean, it's kind of the silver lining out of COVID. Now that we moved everything online, it doesn't matter where you are in Canada or in the world for that matter, you could log into this course. And it's a version of, the fundamentals of passive house that isn't so science heavy as the designer consultant course. So it definitely is geared more to the on-site crews, to construction crews, more visuals, and also more detailings that are important for those particular practitioners. So there is this is Wednesday. Today is the first Wednesday, and there's the next 2 Wednesdays, so 3 Wednesdays online. And as soon as we can have in-person training again, we're gonna choose some locations over the country where we're gonna offer this 1-day hands-on. So we could do one, in Toronto, in Montreal, maybe in Saskatchewan, or wherever there is enough people. Who knows, if that's not possible, we might have to do something else. We could use the high performance building lab and film me or other people showing that on the camera. It's not the same as really doing yourself. We could send out some materials and that, but that, we'll see if that happens.
And I'll point out for folks who are watching us right now, we have the course flyer for it's our 150 series, the tradesperson passive house training is our 150 series, and there's the course flyer that's attached to the presentation right now. So if people want to download the flyer, they can do that, or they can just simply visit our website. There's all sorts of information about that. But why is it so important that trades be trained up in passive house construction?
The main out of the 5 principles, the main principle that we have the biggest influence on as builders, contractors, is the air tightness. So that air tightness is modeled at a certain rate, and it's the only thing that's tested physically in a passive house project with the blower door test, with the air tightness test. So if the airtightness isn't fulfilling the standard, then obviously it can't be certified, but also the airtightness has a direct impact on the energy performance of the building. Right. If you have a leakier building, you're going to lose more heat in the winter, and that's going to perform less than one that is tighter. So that's why we really need to train, especially with what people are used to. When some are used to using poly and duct tape as airtight materials, it's very hard to get to those low numbers with that. So it's a shift in the materials we're going to use, and then it's also a shift in kind of the techniques that we use to get build our airtight layer.
Right. So no more days where a plumber or an electrician needs to put an outlet somewhere on an exterior wall, and they simply drill through the building to get to the outside.
Exactly.
Now, if it's not planned, and if you don't have the right materials in place, you just don't do that, right?
That's correct. Yeah. So that's the other aspect, right? So that's the the site supervision, quality control, and it's important that not just the construction crew, but also the subtrades, as you mentioned, the plumber are informed what's going on, and you might have seen these signs on passive house projects. There is a danger, or not danger, but attention. There is an airtight layer here. Don't just cut it or drill it. Or if you do, report it to the GC. So it's a little bit of more coordination. There's also sequencing involved sometimes in making the airtight layer continuous. But in the end, the passive house standard doesn't really tell you what kind of materials, what kind of wall buildups you have to do. That's the main advantage, I think, of the standard. It can apply in any type of construction as long as you have a material that can make it airtight, as long as you have the U values for the proper insulation. So that's a reason why it also took off so much here, I think, because it nicely adapts to our wood construction.
Right. We always say we're agnostic about building materials, but as long as you adhere to these principles and reach these standards of energy usage and airtightness, you've got a passive house. I've heard you talk about when you're on a construction site, you talk about well, you've just mentioned airtightness is critical, and you've talked about the need on a construction site to have an air boss. Who's the air boss? What does the air boss do? It sounds kind of fun.
So the idea behind the air boss is that you have one person that's responsible for the airtight layer. So typically that would be someone out of the general contractor's crew. In a single family, that might be the site foreman or the lead carpenter. In bigger projects, that could be a junior as well. So the idea is that you have one point of responsibility and not 3 or 4 people that are kind of doing an airtight layer, and then something gets lost, right? So if there's any, excuse me, if there's any issues or through like holes that the subtrades made, or then that person, it gets reported to that person, and that person can fix it. The air boss. Yeah.
It's reported to the air boss, who makes sure, who's in charge of trying to make sure it doesn't happen in the first place, but it's fixed if it does happen. So, and I'm not sure what your sense is working with trades, but I've heard from contractors who are doing passive houses where they have tradespeople who maybe this is their first passive house, and they're just new to the concept or whatever. And the big day arrives when you're going to do a pressure test, and everyone is told not to come in for the day because you're going to be doing the pressure test. And I've had contractors say they show up, and there's there's the couple of the electricians, and they are there, and a plumber, an apprentice is hanging around, and what are you guys doing here? You're supposed to have the day off. But everyone is so excited to see how well their building does on a pressure test that they wanted to be there to see it firsthand. I think it really speaks to that workmanship that's required of a passive house tradesperson, and how people get really excited about it. In fact, when I sat in on your course at Humber College a few months back, I had a couple of gentlemen beside me. They were both framers. And they were, I was wondering why they were there. quite frankly, you know, did their boss make them come? Did they want to come on their own? Did their union tell them about Passive House training? But they were quite clear that they'd spent 20 years in this trade so far, and they were really tired of building the same way that they were building. They weren't happy with it, and they'd heard about Passive House and wanted to learn more and really wanted to up their game in terms of building houses. So it made me feel quite proud actually to be part of Passive House Canada, because here's a couple of guys who are trying to change the game and learn some new skills. And by, I would say by lunchtime, boy, they had bought into the Passive House principles in a big way. They were going to be great evangelists for us going out to preach the Passive House word. So good work to you for getting them so pumped up in there. What do you think are the biggest challenges, other than please don't penetrate the air membrane? What are the big challenges for tradespeople?
I think a lot depends obviously on the scale of building, right? So I'm more used to the single family, maybe duplex, fourplex maximum size. So it still has to do a lot with coordinating a lot of the different trades. And I used to be a lot that we couldn't get materials. It was a bit of a bottleneck there. That has changed quite a bit, thankfully, in the last few years.
Right.
It's more on the coordinator and the trades and just getting, which is just general construction, really. It's not specific into high performance. Also, the interface between the planning team and the construction has to be even better for high performance, and that's a lot of the times where things can go wrong. The typical, the architect just draws the plans, hands them over to the builder and says, okay, build me this, and there's not enough information on there. And then when we ask for information, it takes too long, or it's not the right information. So that's always kind of a critical part. And we'll talk a little bit about the kind of integrated design team and all that. And yeah,
I've heard from architects who were nervous about embarking on that integrated design process, but after they'd been through it once on their first Passive House, they've told me that even if their next building isn't going to be built to Passive House standards, they're going to keep that system because it ultimately made a lot more sense. Well, I'm glad you mentioned the dream team, we'll say, because our next slide, if I can call it up here, is this design team, and maybe you can just walk us through what you're talking about here.
So, like as I mentioned before, typically we used to maybe, the client hiring an architect. They're working together to design this beautiful house. And then once they're done with that, they're going to tender it out for, some contractors to build it. There's some engineers involved doing design process, structural, maybe mechanical as well. And then the builder, they bid, and then the lowest bid gets the goal, right, or gets the job. So a lot of, by doing that, you're already kind of limiting, you just bring it down to the cost of a building. So you're with high performance building, that's maybe not always the best approach. So if your goal is to have a high performance building, you maybe want to have a different approach to this whole team design process. So a lot of time what happens is rather than, just hiring the GC after the design stage, they get involved during design, and not just them. Obviously, the energy consultant, the Passive House consultant, the other engineers, the mechanical and the structural engineer are quite critical for Passive House as well. Structural engineer a lot about avoiding thermal bridging. Mechanical, obviously, with the loads for the hot water, the domestic hot water, the HRV selection, all that. So that all plays in. So that's what we call like design assist from the Passive House. Sometimes even on the larger projects, one of my friends, JF Robert, he's a glazing contractor that does Passive House certified curtain walls. So his preferred way is to get involved with the design team right during design as well, because he does all the shop drawings. So why should an architect do shop drawings of a very specialized product that then the the GF has to redraw and redo. So he already gets front loaded into the process and helps them through the design process. So in the end, it's a more of a team approach. You gotta get used to a collaboration rather than having everyone doing their little chunk and then it's just lining it up.
And all silos, right? They're all working in silos, and
exactly. Yeah.
The cost to the client at the end must be that old process is much higher than the new approach.
Yeah, and the new approach, you save time, you save money in the end, because every day on site costs you money. So the more you can do in advance, and with the Passive House standard, we model the building from the plans. It could be certified before it gets built, at least from the design, and then the only thing that really gets tested is the airtightness, but also there's visual inspections of all the insulation that becomes part of the certification. But it will save time and therefore also cost. So it is a more streamlined approach, I think, in this modern age to any type of designing and building.
Great. And I was going to say to the folks who are listening in to our conversation, if they have a question for you, they can type it into the question box on the side of their screen, and we'll get to those in a few minutes. So if you have a question or think of a question for Marcel, and I'll be happy to pass the real tough ones on to him. What I wanted to do, Marcel, one of the things that I've learned about construction in North America versus Europe, and why Passive House Canada's trades training program is different is somewhat different than that offered in Europe, is we build differently in North America. We're more wood. Europe is more masonry and stone. So that's why we've customized our course for the Canadian and the North American building marketplace. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's definitely true. Especially in the West here and in the prairies, I've seen quite a few masonry buildings going on in Montreal and Toronto. But yeah. But then when you look at larger buildings, that could be mass concrete, or now the newest thing is mass timber, right? That's really something that's coming on board strong. There's high-rises planned in Vancouver that are going to be solid timber, mass timber, CLT.
Yeah. Well, Canada has really taken a lead internationally in passive house buildings in terms of height, and the two mass timber units that have just been approved for Vancouver, and I can't recall the height of them, 35, 40 stories, something like that, will be monstrous. And now it gives me great pleasure when my colleagues from Europe, from whence these standards emerged, are calling to say, what are you guys doing in Canada? How are you doing that? It's great to think back to the days of Dr. Orr and his passive house building, and and then we sort of lost track of the narrative, and now we've got it back again. So it's wonderful to see things build. I have the next slide I'll throw up. The passive house trade person training. We've talked a fair amount about what passive house training means and why folks should take it. But is there anything else that you want to add about our passive house training? You've been intimately involved in developing it and teaching it. What more do people need to know?
Sign up for it, and you'll know. You'll learn the standard. Don't be scared. It's too scientific or anything like that. We think we have done a great job of visualizing the principles. There's lots of examples. We added quite a few more on wood construction. We talk a little bit about mass timber. We talk a bit about prefabrication. There's only so much we can cover, but we're trying to kind of give you an overall idea of a toolbox with principles and skills that you can use later on in your practice. And that's the first step, right? So taking one of these courses gives you a good overview, gives you some in-depth in the critical pieces, but really learning how to do it properly is by implementing it in a project or working with someone that knows it. The way we learn on trades, right? With a master, maybe working on a project. And so I encourage you to take this course, but also any chance you get to look at a passive house building, visit it. There's passive house open houses, there is you know, social events. These are all very valuable. The other thing that's great with doing a course like that, it's also a networking opportunity for you.
Right.
So you're gonna meet like-minded people. There is not just, you know, framers or builders taking this course. There might be engineers, architects, and I've seen some very good connections and friendships coming out of courses and people collaborating afterwards. And it's a great way to see that. And that goes back to that team approach, right?
Right. Well, I was impressed by sitting in on your course, the variety of people who were there. I think we had an engineer or two, an architect or two. We had the framers, carpenters, a couple of project managers, for example, all of them trying to understand passive house building principles, and it was a great way for them to start. So, what I will. I'll leave it there. We're almost to the end of our time. Deb, I'll turn the floor back over to you. If we have any questions, now is the time. If not, we'll make some up.
Great. Though there is a couple here. So I'll break this one up a little bit for you, Marcel. Regarding super insulation, is the R value for walls, ceilings, foundations, and slabs prescribed somewhere for the different climate zones in Passive House Canada, similar to that of the Ontario Building Code?
It's not as simple, really. We're looking at the whole building envelope in Passive House. So if you take, say, a tiny house, we call those laneway houses here, and we use a standard 3,500 square foot house, they won't necessarily have the same U value in the walls, because the tiny house has way more surface area proportionally to the heated volume inside. So there's more heat escaping. So you will need to even put more insulation in that tiny house to fulfill the passive house standard than the larger house. I mean, the extreme would be like a multi-story multi-family house. So that U value is not prescriptive in a way in passive house standard. It's performance based. So we are just looking at the passive house standard. We're looking how much heating energy do we need to put into that building per square meter, square footage of the useful area to keep it comfortable in the winter. So that varies on the size of the buildings. So that's why it's not just a straight table where you can see, okay, this climate zone, we need this amount. There's rules of sums, obviously, right? Because if you're comparing the same size of building and you're moving it around in the Canadian climate zones, then you could start comparing that. But there's not a list like that. No, that's simple.
Right. So it depends on the size of the building, obviously building materials, the different wall assemblies you might be using, a wide variety of things. Which is why people like passive house standards, is that it gives you that flexibility. It's not
exactly. It also depends on the air tightness. Very important. Depends on what type of windows you're using. It depends how much solar gains you're gonna get through the windows. It depends how efficient your HRV is. Those all, it's a really holistic approach. It depends on the thermal bridges, how much energy you lose through them. So all those factors play into the final number of the 15 kilowatt hours per square meter of heating demand that we're looking for, right?
Right, 15 kilowatt hours per cubic meter per year. And I guess at the end of the day, it means that you know, in Southern Ontario or in the Toronto area, if you built say a 2,000 square foot home to passive house standards, you could pretty much heat it with on the days where you need any heat with a 1,200 watt hair dryer. We tell people.
That's right. Yeah.
Or a really big dog, right? Get a really big dog, and they'll keep your place toasty warm.
Exactly.
Jeff, next question.
Yeah, so this is part two to this question that you may have addressed a bit already. Vapor open walls, permitting exterior walls to dry outward, has always been the builder's goal. How is this achieved in Canada to prevent sweating between materials, which creates mold, etc.? If the foam products are used, I suppose the mineral wool products don't share this risk?
That's correct. And that's a very good question. And that's what we were facing with the leaky condo scenario we had in Vancouver, because they used a vapor closed sealed stucco on the very exterior. And we had the poly on the inside. And with air leakage, there was a lot of warm air finding its way into the assembly. And then in the winter, it found its dew point within the assembly. Dew point meaning when the water out of the air turns liquid. So it's like taking a pop can out of your fridge and you see the water curling around. That's exactly what's happening. So that was inside, and then that started, rotting out all the structure. So in our heating dominated climate, we want to be, the rule of thumb is from a vapor control layer towards the outside, we want to be vapor diffusion open. So that means vapor can, any moisture that still finds its way through there, even with 0.6 air changes per hour, it needs to dry out to the outside, because the vapor drive is going to be in the winter time from the inside to the outside. So we're using materials like you mentioned, mineral wool, that is for insulation, that is vapor diffusion open. So if you use foam products, like you mentioned, you can trap moisture behind it, and then you have the same problem that we had in Vancouver. And the same is true for building membranes, the Tyvek Typars kind of family. We use a lot of very vapor open materials for that. We even go as far as using tapes that are vapor diffusion open.
Right.
Okay,
good.
Great.
That's good. Really good questions and good answers. Thank you.
So the next question is their incentive for provincial government to further subsidize the trades courses. They should be mandatory to sync with the tightening step code.
I agree. Yeah.
I don't think you'll have any argument from Passive House Canada. We've been talking to architects, architectural organizations, engineering organizations, and trade schools that this really needs to be baked into their curriculum. If you're an architect and you spend all those years at school, you shouldn't graduate only to have to take a bunch of courses, of Passive House Canada courses, to understand Passive House principles. You should be graduating with the necessary expertise. Same goes for trades, and I know the trade schools that we've talked to only have students for a limited amount of time, and they tell me they just don't have time to put a lot of information in about Passive House, the real high performance buildings, but it's certainly important. Certainly important need to do that. We'll keep pushing that for sure.
Great.
Is there another question?
Okay. Yes, there is. Have you installed renewable energy systems on your buildings, i.e. solar or geo exchange system?
Yes, both. And so that's kind of a question that is also in the Passive House standard, but maybe even goes beyond. Obviously we're trying to reduce the emissions of CO2 in our buildings. And first really is tightening up the envelope, making it super insulated using great windows, no thermal bridging, all those Passive House principles. That's really the first step. So you're reducing already how much energy you're going to use. So definitely in the heating and cooling realm. By doing that, if it's a residence, your domestic hot water is actually going to the energy for heating domestic hot water is higher than what you use for heating. So you got to be now smart about how you're heating that water. And there is a requirement for the total energy that you use in a Passive House that you can't go above. So you're forced into that, and going down even to using Energy Star appliances and being smart about what kind of fixtures they use. So I have done photovoltaic. It's definitely come a long way. It's come down in price. In BC, I think it's the same in Ontario. Most provinces, you're allowed to use the grid as your battery. So you call it a grid-tied system, where you basically hook up your PV system to the hydro grid. When you're overproducing, your meter runs backwards, you get a credit, and then when you're not producing enough, you're pulling from the grid. So that's a great way, and they're getting more and more affordable. We just put in a geothermal system in one of the projects where we did one borehole. So we need way less per Passive House, right? Typically for a single family, you're looking maybe at 4 or 5 boreholes, but we just need one because we need that for the domestic hot water and a little bit of heating. So that's another great way, depending on always on your site conditions, where you are. You know, if you have a lot of sun, maybe you use PV. If you don't have so much, maybe you want to use geothermal. Anything that's in renewable energy, I think, is a good idea. And obviously, using heat pump technology is ideal as well. So either a water-to-water heat pump or air-to-water heat pump. All those, you know, there's some really good products that are available now in Canada that mostly come from Japan or Europe, but I think we'll see a big kind of market increase in that regard as well, with local Canadian companies coming on board with products.
Right, and you touched on a really important point when it comes to renewable energy and passive homes, that because of the quality of the build of a passive home, the low energy requirements of a passive house, the solar, the wind, the geothermal requirements are far less for that building. You mentioned the number of boreholes needed, you know, from 4 down to 1, because the energy requirements are so less. So while you might pay a little bit more for windows and a little bit more for insulation in a passive house, you certainly save on mechanical systems or solar if you're adding that to the building. Another question?
Yeah, there's just 2 more questions left here. Is the passive house system focused to absorb more radiation from environment during winter, or can it store radiation during summer to use in winter?
Unfortunately, it's not that easy. That would be a long-term storage, and that's it might help with cooling more than with heating, but it's mostly between day and nighttime temperature differentials. You could, I mean, I heard of some crazy projects. There's a guy in Alaska who had this huge water tank under his building that during the summertime he would heat it up, and then in the winter he would draw some of that energy of it. You could, you know, use that. I mean, passive house standard doesn't say you have to do it, but you could use it and then model it in the PHPP as well. But that might be some of the things to come on board in the future. There might, you know, there's phase-changing materials now that are being researched, and all these, you know, kind of new R&D that's done on that regard. So that might be something that we can see a bit more in the future that could work to transfer some of the energy from between the seasons.
Good. And Deb, there's been a few questions around green energy, and I want to point out that you know, historically, passive house has been focused on operational carbon. So how much energy, you know, how much fossil fuels are required to heat or cool your building, and passive house, you know, my humble opinion, by far beats any of the other building standards that are out there in terms of driving out operational carbon. And Passive House Canada has recently begun to focus on embodied carbon as well, so that it's not just the operational carbon, because as we move into new building codes, the operational carbon will be driven out. We also need, as passive house designers and builders, to focus on embodied carbon, and so we've started to do some training around that for our members to give them the heads up. Next question, Deb.
Great. Okay, this is the last question I left for last. Great question. New graduate has asked, I'm very interested in passive house. Can you tell me, where does the passive house career start?
By taking one of the courses, I would say. Depends what field you're in. If you're an engineer, architect, I mean, on the Passive House Canada webpage, it's nicely laid out, the different courses. Like the kind of the lightest would be a 110, just a few hours intro. But if you're serious about it, I would recommend our pathway to certification, as we call it, which is the fundamental kind of courses for any consultant, with the 120A, 120B, and then with an exam if you want to take it at the end. And then I encourage you to network, use the network of passive house people we have on our webpage. We have, you know, virtual socials every Wednesday that are worldwide through Passive House Accelerator. There's Passive House Canada socials that are happening as well. So take advantage of all those free things that are happening to meet like-minded people, meet maybe a mentor or something that can help you along the way, wherever you are located in Canada. there's lots of us everywhere now. In every province, I think you can find some like-minded people.
You know, Marcel, the one thing for that question, the one thing I really like about the Passive House environment and the people who are involved in this, they're very passionate about GHG reductions. They're very aware of the impact that buildings have on climate change, but they're also very passionate about just building good quality buildings and providing, you know, homes, offices, hospitals, schools that are really top notch. But I've never met a group of people who are so willing to help each other out. I mean, by day, they're competitors in a very competitive field, but by night, when they're in these groups and chat rooms or whatever, they're trying to solve common problems together. And it's very nice. It's a really good community to be part of. So I would encourage whoever asked that question to check out our website, the Pathways to Certification. Check out the free socials and get to know a few people because we have members and Passive House practitioners all across Canada, and I'm sure we can help you find some people in your neighborhood. So anything else, Deb? Are we done?
Yeah, no, I think we are just about out of time here.
Okay, you're right. We're just about out of time. So thank you, Marcel, for today's information and your input. Thank you for the work you've done in helping to develop Passive House Canada's trades course and for all the delivery of that trades course you've done. It's really important. It's important to train the engineers, the architects, the building scientists, but if we don't train people who are swinging the hammers and using the drills, we'll run into problems. And I know that from what I've seen, you know, the tradesperson courses are fairly straightforward. They're hands-on, and they'll teach you all the fundamentals and really get you on your way. So thank you very much with that. And we can turn off our microphones or our speakers, and I will go to, or our cameras is what I'm really trying to get at. I'll say goodbye, and I will move to our last slide of the day, which is, thanks, Marcel, which is about our next presentation, which is on September the 16th, and it's going to be a really interesting one. We've heard from architects, engineers, tradespeople, government officials, but we've never really heard from a homeowner. So on September the 16th, we'll have Tracy Johnson, Toronto homeowner who did a major EnerPhit renovation to her home in the Toronto area. The chap who headed that up for her was Hermaine Weissman. We'll have Hermaine and Tracy on the show together to talk about the challenges that Tracy faced, why she picked Passive House, and I'm really looking forward to their conversation because Tracy is very passionate, and I know from a Passive House community member, she's going to have some straight talking advice for us about how we can do things better. So folks, I'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of the day. I hope you enjoy your August and that that even if it's a staycation, you get some time to yourselves. Until then, take care.